Hi, everyone, and welcome to Behind the Numbers. This is the show where we go beyond the data to explore the people, the stories, and the insights that really drive business success. My name is Dave Bookbinder. I am known as a business valuation expert and best-selling author, and I thank you for joining me. Today, I've got a guest who's a keynote speaker on data-driven value creation. He's also the author of the award-winning book Data Impact, and I am talking about Ritavan. Welcome to Behind the Numbers.
Thanks, Dave. Great to be here.
Pleasure to have you. Tell the audience a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Well, you've actually said a very important thing already. So, yeah, I'm Ritavan, an author of Data Impact, which is won an award, and my focus is on data-driven value creation. Because what I argue is that cutting costs without taking into account value is actually very easy. I mean, fire stuff, sell stuff. That kind of stuff is trivial. Unfortunately, a lot of focus goes in that direction, because it gives businesses a short-term sugar high and diabetes of some sorts. And I'm focused on value creation because I think we could all benefit from that as business owners, as investors, and as society at large.
Yeah, well said. As a guy who's in the valuation space and believes in value creation and helps clients do that, often find people are driven by short-term goals to meet either analyst expectations if they're public companies or private equity expectations and so forth. So you got to have the long view. But let's start with your origin story. What inspired you to write your book, Data Impact? And was there a particular moment or a pain point that convinced you that leaders needed a clearer playbook for data value creation?
Yeah, so it's really born from a decade of operating across a range of traditional sectors, things like energy, real estate, banking, insurance, etc. And what I saw happening was that there was a whole bunch of digital native companies that were born and that were extremely successful, and then there was this sort of story spun around traditional businesses, industrial era businesses needed to digitally transform. And I feel like I make a case for why that does not make any sense. You can't really transform because these are different value creation paradigms, right? Driven by different constraints, by different goals. And you can't just transform from one to the other. It's like saying you want to transform a baseball player into a basketball player. It's two different games. And unfortunately, a lot of money has been spent on stuff like this. Success rates of these initiatives are just shocking. Even the big consultancies publish their own white papers, with failure rates of digital transformation, most recently AI, transformations, with failure rates of 80-90%. And business schools then, aggregate these into meta studies. And IMD Business School published a meta study where their estimate was that failure rates are 87.5%. But broadly, it's just an unmitigated disaster, and this is and there are very structural, first principles reasons why. And so the idea with Data Impact was to set those on the table, so business owners, don't let hype and vendors, don't let that tail of hype and vendors whack the dog, right? So that was really the core motivation.
Wow, I would not have guessed that the failure rate was that high.
Yeah, I mean, and like I said, it's really structural reasons. It's not like people are stupid. It's not like people don't want to do it. It's just you cannot take a star baseball player and make them win the NBA, just like you cannot take a star NBA player and make them win in baseball. That's just it's the nature of things, right? And
Good analogy.
no amount of change management is going to change that, right? There's just certain structural things. It's not about convincing people. It's not about coaxing them into it. So all of that, even with good incentives, you can't achieve that just because, you're trying to play the wrong game.
Yeah, great analogy. So you describe yourself as the SLASOG guy, and for folks out there listening, it's SLASOG. Tell us what SLASOG stands for, and how does that framework reflect your core philosophy about data and business value?
Yeah, so SLASOG is the 6-step framework in Data Impact. So It's just yeah, it's a nice acronym. I guess it stands out and it's pretty easy to remember, even though it's a little hard to pronounce. I had someone say, it made them think about a character from the Lord of the Rings. Someone else said it sounded like some kind of unfiltered spirit. But anyway, so so the 6 steps of SLASOG are the following: is save. It's save first, and this is very important to me because a lot of times people think people are convinced we don't have money, we can't do something, etc., just because we don't have capital to get started. And that's why the first step for me was very important. And so once you start with save, you start saving money by not doing stupid things, right? And that gives you then seed capital to go on to the next step, which is leverage. And leverage has got a bad rap because in finance it's come to mean taking on debt. And the meaning of leverage, though, across history was something very different. From the time of Archimedes, leverage is the idea of with minimum input getting maximum output, right? So this kind of 80-20 kind of approach where you say, okay, with where's that 20% that's going to give me that 80% impact? And so the idea with leverage is to say we're not playing on a level playing field. Everyone is being dealt different cards, etc. And so you want to leverage all those unique, proprietary and asymmetric strengths that you have. And once you have identified them, and there aren't like 50 of them, there are probably 1, 2, at most 3 of them. Once you've identified them, you want to focus on them, right? You want to leverage your unique proprietary asymmetric strengths. Once you do that, you want to align everyone and everything to those leveraged strengths. And once you've aligned everyone, then you want to make sure you simplify. And the idea in simplify is, if save gives you capital to, build your bow and arrow, right? And leverage allows you to point it, leverage is the bullseye, right? That's where you point it. Align makes sure, you focus everything on the bullseye. Simplify removes the clutter between the arrow you're going to fire and the bullseye. It removes everything else that could affect your shot and slow you down, etc. And once you simplify, you're ready to optimize, because now you know that you've removed all the clutter and you want to really juice out your returns. And the point of all of this is to grow. And so the 6 steps of SLASOG are save, leverage, align, simplify, optimize, grow.
Yeah, and in your work and your conversations with leaders, how often are you finding that people are actually doing this the right way?
Um, I think a big problem that that happens is that people try to look for what is called, in quotes, best practices, and that's essentially a form of groupthink for me, right? So you say, let me look left, let me look right, let's see what other people are doing, and I try to do some kind of best common denominator, right? Some of what other people are doing. Now there are many problems with this. I mean, one being that and we know this all as investors, is if you do what everyone else is doing, then you will have average returns by design. You cannot outperform. So even in the best case, even if you're if you execute beautifully and are successful, you will still end up with the average. The second point is that it assumes that everyone's operating in a similar context, right? But you aren't, because everyone is dealt different cards. You have different strengths, you have different assets, you have a different brand, etc. So everyone has a unique portfolio of strengths. And so what you should be focused about is thinking from first principles, how you leverage those strengths to achieve your goals. And so just seeing what someone else did, it's nice. I think, as just like, you read a book and think about things, why not? But that's not a winning strategy. So just copying other people is not smart. So I think that, so I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it does. It's a very interesting perspective on best practices. Um, well said, man. Has your view on data as a strategic asset evolved over time since you began your career?
Yeah, and very much, I think, when I was in grad school specializing in math and machine learning, um, it's almost ideological, right? So you're made to believe if you build a better algorithm that you will end up with better outcomes, whatever better means. But very often in when you're working on this stuff, from an academic or research perspective, it's very much about the sophistication of the math, the algorithm, etc. When that hits the real world, that's when you realize that it's not just the algorithm in itself is just one piece of a bigger puzzle, right? That you need to think from first principles as a systems thinker. And so my convictions around what actually drives value has definitely evolved over the years. So this is not to say that you need you can be you can forget rigor and you can just sort of hand wave your way to success, right? So I think having technical depth and rigor in your approach is extremely valuable, but it is definitely not a sufficient condition, right? You have to think differently about the entire system.
Yeah. And let's talk a little bit about the business and value creation for a moment here. Because many people are talking about this concept of digital transformation. Even put that in air quotes because it's such a popular term. But you emphasize this business first, value oriented approach. What distinguishes your methodology from the typical, tech for tech's sake digital transformation playbook?
So the fundamental observation is the following, which is that as a species, we have lived through different value creation paradigms, and there were some very personal anecdotes that sort of got me thinking along those lines. But I just share two of them, which kind of really take us back to the very early forms of humankind's approach to value creation. So I was at a yacht club, and I went out out to sea in a sailboat with friends. And on the way there, coming out into the sea, I saw a lot of these big nets that fisher folk had set up close to the coast. And um, the friend sort of who was captaining the boat said, this is basically some form of passive income, right? So the idea is you set up a net and you let fish swim into it. At the same time, right, as we really started entering the sea, there were a whole range of biggish size, pretty fast moving speedboat like boats coming our way, also with fisher folk in it. And so the idea is that net there has not been set up so that the fisher folk can go and watch a movie. That net has been set up as a baseline automation to make sure that if they're not successful out at sea, they have at least something to stay alive, right? And so from the time of fishing, they're following a portfolio approach. And so you have basic automation, which has relatively low yield, which keeps you alive. But then you still play that high leverage strategy of going out there, hunting the big fish or looking for for the big shoals of fish. And then I went and looked at hunter gatherer data, and of course, we don't have data from the Stone Age, but there are a lot of anthropologists who are studying communities of hunter gatherers around the world, a whole range of tribes across different continents, and they collect data, and it's quite fascinating because you broadly see a similar portfolio approach. Because if you think about it, you might think, okay, once I have this idea of traps, right, once I've automated something, then why should I bother hunting, right? But the point is, if you set up traps, there are firstly many constraints in terms of how far you can scale traps. But more importantly, let's say you could set up a lot of traps just to kind of have enough. The tribe beside you could also do that, and then they could reinvest their free time into something that is higher leverage. And so at the end, the take home is, in a competitive market, it's not enough to just automate what you have. And so once you take what can be standardized, right, and you standardize it and set it up as traps in some sort of basic form of automation, then those wins, you want to reinvest them into value creation, which is higher leverage work. And so what that typically represented was actually the stereotype of hunting, which is big game, right? So they have much lower success rates, right? But when you do succeed at big game, it's like a bonanza for everyone. And so the lesson here is that humanity has evolved through value creation paradigm, from hunter gatherers, fishing, etc., to agriculture. And in agriculture, the whole game changes. The new baseline form of automation moves away from traps to land, because if you think about it as farmers, right, and without wanting to downplay the knowledge and expertise required, but at the end, you drop a seed into fertile ground, and nature's doing a lot of the heavy lifting, right? I mean, even the most sophisticated farmer cannot grow a seed without the soil, right, without land. And so land becomes your sort of unit of value creation. Then comes the industrial paradigm, and again, sort of this core unit of value creation changes, and it's no longer land. You don't need large tracts of land. It's about machinery, raw materials, and labor. And then from the industrial value creation paradigm, you move on to the digital one. And in the digital one, machinery, labor, etc., again, those are not the units of value creation. It's something else, right? And so the idea is every paradigm has its own logic, its own system, and the role of data is within that context, right? So you can't really transform. It's like telling a fisher person to become an industrialist. Something. Yes, they could set up a small factory to freeze or process the fish, but they cannot apply the, in quotes, best practices from fishing to that factory. Similarly, they cannot take their fish packaging factories ideas and use that to go fishing. I mean, and that's what I mean, like these are separate ways to create value. And if you don't have the rigor to think along those lines, and you try to use technology from one place, or processes, or ways of doing things from one of these paradigms to the other, by design you can't be successful, right? Even if you were to execute it beautifully.
Yeah, I got to tell you, your use of analogies and metaphors is just brilliant in helping to make what's often a very clunky topic much more relatable and understandable. So thank you so much for doing that. In your view, Ritavan, what are the top few types of value, whether it's cost savings, revenue growth, intangible value, et cetera, that data can actually unlock?
So the most important thing is, I think, to start by understanding your unique unfair advantages, right? Or your unique asymmetric advantages. And ideally, you want them to be proprietary, right? And that, again, best practices, again, become irrelevant, because if you copy someone else, then it's proprietary to them. And if it's not proprietary to you, it's useless, right? So the core idea is, let's focus on traditional businesses, right? So non-digital native businesses, you're going to have a set. So most importantly, you've been around. That means you have some form of existing demand, right? Someone is buying something from you, and that is where that's one of your that is by design your proprietary asymmetric advantage, because no one else has the exact same demand profile that you have. So now you want to look in there and find these asymmetries, right? So where can you get that kind of Pareto value, that 80-20 kind of leverage effect, right? Then you have physical assets, right? And I have examples in the book that speak about companies who, were first trying to play the digital native game and getting crushed. And then the day they realize they actually have massive advantages thanks to their legacy assets, physical assets, they played very differently. And, one example in the US is Walmart, right? So the whole story, if we go back about 15-20 years or so, the whole narrative was, okay, it's going to be Amazon and e-commerce that's going to take over retail basically, and we won't need any physical retailers anymore. And that is true if the physical retailers play the Amazon game, right? The problem is that physical retailers have proprietary asymmetric assets, which is their network of stores. And there are these plots that went pretty viral of how I don't know, 70-80% of the population is within a couple of kilometers of a, of a physical retail location, right? And things like that. And so the moment you think from that perspective, you realize, okay, why are we playing the digital only game when we can play on our turf to our strengths? And so so what Walmart went about doing then is to say, we don't just understand the customer online, we understand them physically in the stores. And that kind of data is extremely valuable to suppliers. And so now, they've set up 3 different data driven businesses, from their, their subscriptions, I think with Walmart Plus, with an advertising business where, because they understand how customers shop physically in their stores as well as online, they can personalize and target ads very well. And thirdly, then providing these point of sales insights back to suppliers. And so this is just one example where you see you can either play a losing game with a digital native competitor, or you just take a step back, think from first principles, you pick your battlefield and you play to your strengths, and you will win by design, right?
Yeah, by design, exactly. I want to talk a little bit about the people behind the data, which is sort of the undercurrent theme of this program, as you know. Given your audience of CEOs and boards and leadership teams, how do you advise them to think about talent and corporate culture, organizational culture, when shifting towards data-driven decision making?
Um, I- so I think there's a range of things to keep in mind, right? So the most important one is to shed this groupthink lens, right? So, and this has to be really all across the organization, because if you're wearing kind of tinted glasses, you will only see the world in a certain way, which does not mean the world actually is like that. It's just you're seeing it through that lens. And so there's a whole load of myths that I and kind of illusions that I try to bust in the early on in the book. And it's things like, we can crowdsource a winning strategy, right? Or we if we follow, quote unquote group best practices, which is basically groupthink, we will become a better business. If we upgrade all our tech systems, right? If we have the latest technology stack, then we will be a better business. And so there's a whole range of such things that you should, everyone in the org should be convinced are not going to work, because those are the first things that come to mind. And at all levels of the org, those are the stickiest ones, because they're the most lazy ones, actually, right?
Mm.
You don't need to think much. That's the default sort of slope. And so if you do not make sure you remove that tilt, that slope away, then just laziness will pull the org down into that direction. So once you achieve that, I think then you've energized people to really think from first principles about the entire system. And I think if we were to speak about really change management or mindset and all of that, I think these are the 2 key things, which is there is a generic slope. Also things, like data is the new oil, right? I mean,
Mm.
what a completely retarded way to frame data as a commodity. I mean, it just, it sounds so smart, but if you think a little longer, you realize it's complete BS, right? And so you take all these common tropes, you bust them, you make sure everyone, and let people challenge, right? I mean, let people ask their questions, make sure everyone has got is really deeply sort of internalized this all of these things, right? You need to get them on board first, and it's really about thinking. You don't need to spend more on cloud, you don't need to upgrade your CRM, you don't need a new ERP. This stuff is free, right? You just need to
Mm.
sit down with people, have a conversation, rigorously think, and just remove those tinted glasses that are making everyone see things that that don't exist. And once you do that, right, then people feel energized to really contribute, to come up with better ideas. And that's it. And I don't think you need to do much more in terms of sort of change management, and kind of convincing people, etc. Because once you have that and you play the right game, right, then on a battlefield of your picking to your strengths, what logically can prevent you from winning, right? Except some bad luck. But I mean, over time, you can't just be, unlucky all through. So
Yeah, good stuff. We're getting close to the end here, but before we have to conclude, um, advice for companies here. So the ones that are struggling with what's often referred to as the spray and pray data initiatives, what's your recommended first move for these businesses who want to really get serious about data?
so the most important thing is to forget this idea of quick wins. I think this is a very, this is the kind of thing, like, if as a vendor, someone wants to rip you off, that's what they will sell you. And if you just think about it, right, if quick wins existed, and let's look at any other context except the data and business context, right? So now if an investment advisor walks up to you and says, I will double your money, right, in a month. You, yeah, that sounds very scammy, right? So you would say, oh, hold on, this is too good to be true, and so probably it isn't, and there's definitely something fishy about this. Now, what if a fitness a coach walks up to you and says, I'll get you a six-pack in 2 weeks, right?
Mhm.
So you will again say, even if it were true, you would probably do something that would cause major harm to my body, right? Even if I do get the six pack, it's going to be at some cost, right? Or a nutritionist saying you will lose, all your visceral fat in a week, right? So, all these kind of promises, these ideas of we want it now and we want it quickly, are nonsense, right? And so, why in the data and business case should that be true, right? And so, if you now think about wealth and health, right, and take a step back and say, how do we think about compounding those, right, in a meaningful way? Just apply that same mindset, that same lens to compounding data-driven value creation. So forget these, we buy this, we build this quickly, we tweak something here. That stuff doesn't work. That's nonsense, right? And even if it did work, it's not going to help you win the long game, because what if it does work, right? What if the next quarter you hit your goal? What then, right? And so you want to really go back to first principles, understand the system, and build towards something that has some kind of compounding logic over long periods of time, because at the end of the day, that's what separates the winners from the losers.
Yeah, are there key metrics or KPIs that you focus on to track the value created by data efforts?
So I have a method about how to come up with your own, because if my key argument is that you need to focus on your in your proprietary unique asymmetric advantages, if there were a generic KPI, right, that would be in conflict with that idea. And so it I think, thinking, I mean, there are some generic ones that apply more broadly, but I think the real value comes from defining it based on your unique context, right? And I think the book gives some questions, some prompts, some ways to get you thinking in that direction. But yes, if it were on the table, anyone would use it too, right? And then it's gone. So
Before we have to say farewell here, tell the audience where they can find you, how they can learn more about you, work with you, and where they can find the book.
So the book is on Amazon across all their markets, but also across a whole range of retailers around the world. So I guess the easiest place would be Amazon, but feel free to, if you don't like Amazon, you can find it on every country has their own site. Don't have a full list of all the online book retailers. My website is ritavan.com. I have a YouTube channel where if you type SLASOG, you will find me. I have a podcast where I dive deeper into data-driven value creation. And so there's a whole range of places. And of course, I'm relatively active on LinkedIn, so you can find me there too.
Don't be shy. Tell everybody the name of the podcast and where they can find that.
So the podcast is called SLASOG, Leaders or Readers. That's where I focus on data-driven value creation. And then I have another podcast called Part Maven, Part Maverick, which is me basically learning in public, reading very widely, and speaking across a range of topics.
Yeah, it sounds like if people search SLASOG, they're going to find you.
Exactly.
There you go. Ritavan, thank you so much for joining us today on Behind the Numbers. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, David. It was a blast.
Thank you. And thank you out there for tuning into Behind the Numbers. If you enjoyed the episode, you know the drill, gang. Be kind and please do leave us a review. Those things do move the needle and it helps other people find the program. It's very much appreciated when you do that. Don't forget, also hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Until next time, I am Dave Bookbinder reminding you that the numbers tell the story, but the people bring it to life. Take care, gang. We'll see you next time.